Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Ms. Jenkins, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Ms. Bradley?
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Cody?
Here.
Ms. Della Gardell?
Here.
Ms. Martirano?
Here.
Ms. Sawyer?
Here.
Thank you. Before we get started with our school board meeting, I'd like to do something that we haven't done here at the board table before, but I feel like it's very important. And I was prompted to do this after someone who was here for our public meeting last week asked me a very simple question. They asked me how I was doing. And we don't get asked that question too often when we're here at the board table. And I was very open and honest and said that I had a lot on my mind, but I was going to be present for the meeting and get through it. And it just led me to believe that, you know, we're all dealing with things and we don't take the time to really check in with one another. And so I want to start something new with this board. And I just want to take the time before we really get into the meeting and work and start going into the work at hand is to just do a check-in. So my simple question to everyone here at the table is, how are you feeling? And please feel free to answer that question and share with the board. And if you don't feel like answering, that is okay too. But this is inclusive of everyone at the board table, superintendent as well. But I really want to just know how everyone is doing today.
Thank you, Joanna. I'll go ahead and start, and I appreciate the check-in question. As a majority of my meetings, this is how we start our time together as groups. Today, I will tell you I am feeling a little tired coming off of just the weekend and wishing I had a little bit more time, but excited to move this meeting forward and look at our next monitoring report. Can you hear me? Now? Yep. Okay. I know everybody around the horseshoe has another paying job, and I think that we all take this volunteer role very seriously, but I think sometimes at the end of the day, we sometimes show up feeling a little spent. And that's sort of how I'm feeling today. I've had a number of staff changes in my job, and so just really helping to manage and facilitate those has really taken away a lot of my energy. But I guess every time I come to this table, I feel like I have to sort of dig deeper. And I have to show up because this is a really important role. So I'm going to dig really deep today, and I hope you'll just hang with me in case I fall short on a couple of things. But thank you. Thanks for the question.
I'll jump in. Can you guys hear me okay? This is my second night of a 4-night week where I'm going to work 12 or more hours. We have parent-teacher conferences this week. So I was with parents until 7:30 last night, and I'll be with parents again until 7:30 tomorrow night and all day Thursday. So it's just a week of lots of meetings and full teaching and grading. So I'm still feeling pretty fresh because I'm still on the front half of that week. But yeah, this week always feels a little bit like a marathon for me. And I was reflecting today that this will be the last time that I will do a board meeting in the middle of a full week of conferences, which is kind of a bittersweet realization. So.
I'm excited overall. It's been a bit of an exhausting month, but overall very excited for the results of the election this evening and excited to continue our work regarding monitoring. Last month we met our 50% goal. This month, after today's monitoring, we'll meet our 50% goal. So as a board, I really appreciate the focus of student outcomes and continuing to move that focus forward and working for the kiddos.
Anyone else?
I'm doing all right.
Same.
Yep, I'm doing well.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I'm doing fine. I think I feel a little overwhelmed today as well. I've got a little headache, and I'm where Terry is today. That I'm just going to dig deep and dig into this meeting. I'm very excited for the work we're doing as well. But I will say I'm just kind of here today, but I'm not kind of here. So I do ask for grace this evening as well, because there's a lot going on in my brain, but I am definitely glad to be at the table with you all on another election evening. So looking forward to the work we're doing. And I thank you all for participating. I know it can be different to have someone ask you, how are you doing? I know it's something that we don't do enough because we're just so busy being concerned about getting the work done at hand. I really think it's important that we take time to check on each other, especially all the things that people are going through that we may not visibly see, but we are all going through something. So, Board, I really appreciate you chiming in this evening. We will now continue with the rest of our meeting, and the first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Caldwell Johnson, move approval.
Martirano, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson and a second by Ms. Martirano. Ms. Jenkins, could you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Della Gardell,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved, 7-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our meeting on Tuesday, October 19th, 2021. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes.
Caldwell Johnson, move approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson and a second by Mr. Barron. Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Della Gardell,
Abstain.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6 with 1 abstaining. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our special meeting on Wednesday, October 20th, 2021. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Martirano, so moved.
Della Gardell, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Martirano and a second by Ms. Della Gardell. Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Abstain.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Della Gardell,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6 with 1 abstaining. Next on the agenda is public forum. We provide speakers at the forum an opportunity to address the board for up to 3 minutes regarding items that are not on the board agenda. If anyone wishes to speak to this forum, please email aaron.jenkins@dmschools.org. Speakers will be called individually, and we ask that you please state your name and address prior to providing comments. Guests of the board are encouraged to speak to matters relating to the programs, services, and operations of DMPS. Please remember that Iowa law prohibits us from discussing specific employees or their job performance. Please avoid references to personalities or character attacks, as those types of comments do not contribute to the purpose for which this public forum exists. Thank you for your support of our school district. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, this public forum is not a time for board engagement and discussion, as it is our obligation to discuss only matters posted in the public agenda for the sake of transparency and opportunity afforded to all community stakeholders. Matters requiring attention will receive appropriate staff and/or board follow-up at a time after the meeting. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers this evening?
We do. We have several. First up is Hakeem Mohammed.
Just speaking here. Yeah, the mic's on there. You just talk to the computer. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm here to elaborate on the situation at East. I was with RJ Miller on Tuesday morning when we went to talk about a situation that happened prior with another student, as well as a situation that we had de-escalated that had a opportunity to become violence with other students, but we were able to de-escalate. And during this conversation, he wasn't given a chance to speak up for himself. He felt like he was being treated like he was a second-class citizen and that he was less than his staff members because he was working the urban dream. At some point in this conversation, he was accused of gang-affiliated activities in the hallway. It makes you wonder what the school really feel about their Black students and staff members. At the end of the conversation, the administrators told him that they were going to investigate the situation and send him home for the rest of the day. And so he figured that he was just going to come back the next day, nothing about being fired or contract being terminated, nothing like that. We got outside, went across the street, got flagged down by public safety, who informed him that they wanted to talk to him about our PD wanted to talk to him, in which he was informed that the principal was going to be the principal was going to be trespassing him. He got a copy of the trespass and then went to Urban Dreams to talk to him about the situation. And at some point later that night, the disturbing messages were sent to him. And I personally believe that, whatever the situation is, someone who speaks like that or thinks that way about minority students at a time like this shouldn't be representing DM schools, a district that prides itself on urban education and the impact that it has on the youth. I believe we need more diversity in our schools and our administration, our teachers, and more people of color involved in the schools. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Next up, we have Brendan Oliver.
Hi, my name is Brandon Oliver. I live at 3021 Southwest 29th Street, Des Moines, Iowa, 50321. I want to first thank all the paid and unpaid district leaders who work toward equitable outcomes for our students. It is noticed. I'm sure there are times when I speak that it seems nothing will make me happy. I feel happiness and satisfaction are very different things. I hope none of us are satisfied with our current conditions, but I do hope we can recognize the joy along the way. Something I want to share about myself is that I strive to be a work in progress. Although it is sometimes uncomfortable, I appreciate when I'm given advice on how to be a more equitable human being. The advice that's given to me is only valid if the person is aware of what I'm doing in the first place. If I know they're aware of what I'm doing, then their advice tends to be more relevant to me rather than an empty, sweeping comment. I see a lot of students and staff every day at school. I notice our behaviors, our patterns, our values, and more. I see these things because I'm present and in it. When I try to talk with some of our colleagues and students about district initiatives and goals, I often find myself saying the names of paid district leaders who my colleagues don't recognize. To me, this is a sign of a disconnect. As a colleague of mine asks, who are the McCombs teachers and staff that see ourselves as a part of McCombs community, as opposed to seeing ourselves as daily visitors of the McCombs community? I question who of our paid district leaders see themselves as a part of each school's community. Is it sometimes an us-them feeling? It probably depends on the individual, but should it? I'm happy I feel a sense of belonging at McCombs by my administrators. I'm happy with this, while I'm unsatisfied that I don't quite feel the system of DMPS accepts me as a part of the district-wide family. To our paid district leaders, please make sure you're a part of our communities and that we know you're a part of ours. Please don't just visit us. Really see us and let us see you. Witness us, and let us witness you. Let's strive together to be a work in progress. Although I don't expect perfection, I do expect connectedness. I'll end with a quote by Audre Lorde. Without community, there is no liberation. But community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also have two statements from students that I'm going to read. The first one states, "Hi, my name is Zamaya Cantu, and I am a student at East High School. I am sending this to you to share my experience with RJ Miller first off. He is a really respected person at East High School. He is nice and show he cares and respects the students and helps as much as he can with the students and what they are going through. He did not deserve to be talked to how that lady talked to him. It was very unprofessional and very disrespectful. Literally, he tried his best to be the best. He could always be the best he could and always showed respect. It's sad that he won't be able to be at East anymore. I went through a really hard time and a lot of people wanted to hurt me, and he was the only one who genuinely wanted to help. He was always there when people needed someone to when someone needed someone to talk to." And the next one is from Abby H. "Hi, I go to East High School. I have been struggling this year. Always feeling invalidated has been hard. I have one staff member who has made me feel hurt, RJ Miller. His contract was recently terminated. I honestly only have gone to East for this long because I have someone to talk to. RJ was amazing at his job, and I really think he does make a difference at East. With the violence that goes on there, RJ is the best at resolving issues before they turn physical and just restoring the peace. RJ makes East a better place, and I really don't want to imagine going there without him. He's my favorite staff, and I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. RJ wants to make a difference, and he's doing a good job. Please let him continue to make a difference for us." We do not have any other speakers at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers for addressing the board this evening. Please, I would like to remind you all that anything that is requiring at the attention will receive appropriate staff and our board follow-up at a time after this meeting. The next item on our agenda is C1, third grade reading, part 1. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do. Brendan Oliver.
Hi, Brandon Oliver, live at 3021 Southwest 29th Street, Des Moines, Iowa, 50321. I'd like to bring attention to some inconsistencies that this monitoring report states the goal of being 2024, while the board governance policies page on the district website still states 2023 as being the goal. Hopefully the website can be updated soon. I know these monitoring report conversations can be grueling. They sometimes exhaust me just by watching them, but I appreciate everyone who contributes to them and speaks up on what we can improve. Silence certainly does not serve our students well. Beyond that, I hope adult behavior data will begin to be included on these reports. I've commented on 3 monitoring reports before this one, and every time I'm acknowledged by name as raising good points about referral data, but it still doesn't seem to be part of the report. Leaving out data on adult behavior could give the perception that the students are causing their own deficiencies. At the very least, I hope it can be acknowledged as a shared responsibility between staff and students. Let's not throw blame until we're able to look at ourselves first as the paid professional supports for these students. Maybe we have room for growth also. Maybe we're not quite proficient on teaching literacy to our students. That could be enlightening and a relief to acknowledge. I don't say that as an attack. The SEL training I recently participated in would refer to that not as a strength, but a stretch. It's a good thing. I'm also hopeful our schools will stop being lumped together as one large data point in the reports. We have a lot of nuance between neighborhoods and schools. We should honor that and highlight each school's strengths and stretches. I'd like to see the correlation data, which reveals what our high-performing schools are doing. What resources are available to them, which we should strive to make available to all of our schools. By resources, I include people in our social and emotional understanding, not just monetary resources. Let's not just focus on class time or planning time, but how time is used by teachers, or rather, how teachers are sometimes used for class time. Perhaps the data included in this report is symptomatic of things we need to improve. I want to see the data which reflects what we can change as adults. I would never want to change students. I can only change my own behavior. Know what I mean? Let's focus on that. Let's focus on adult behavior. Then we'll start to see the students' outcomes improve. Thank you.
We have no further speakers.
Thank you, Ms. Lincoln, and thank you, Mr. Oliver, for addressing the board. Before we get started and I turn things over to Superintendent Ahart, I would like to share with the community what you are about to see. We are about to go into our monitoring conversation. And before we even get into having this conversation, there are 4 things as a board that we look at. We first look at, does it clearly show what is being monitored, which we do know that we are about monitoring goal 1. Does it clearly show data for the 3 previous reporting periods? And here at the board table, some of us have our monitoring reports in front of us. So we do have that information. Does it clearly show the superintendent's evaluation of performance? It does. And then does it, and right now it's at not compliant. And does it clearly show supporting documentation that evidences the superintendent's evaluation? And there is that in this report. Just for the community to know, this is what we look at before we even begin to have the conversation with our superintendent about this monitoring report. Now that we have gone through those 4 questions, what you will see next in just a moment is the superintendent will have some time to speak concerning this monitoring report, and then I will turn this over for questioning to the board. The board will ask questions in the who, what, and why frame before we go into the how. The how questions are what we're going to be doing in the future. So right now, the board will be getting a clear idea from our superintendent of what's going on, and then also what is the superintendent's vision to move things forward so that we will be in a position to be compliant moving forward. So I am going to turn it over now to Superintendent Ahart to introduce the matter, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. This is the first report on the all students 3rd grade reading, and I've evaluated this as not compliant. As you note, at each of the grade levels reported, we were shy of the target, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3% at each level. So clearly not compliant. There are, though, some things that I just wanted to highlight for the board before we get into discussion. The first is, if you look at, let me find the right page here, page 9, the percent of students K3 meeting benchmark on fast fall reading correlated with attendance at preschool. And there's a few things that I want to make sure are clear here. The data here are intended to illustrate that attending preschool significantly impacts meeting reading benchmarks. For the all students example, 76% of our K3 students meeting benchmark attended preschool, and all but the 24% who met but attended no preschool. The data, and I want to make sure this is clear, the data is not about the efficacy of partner versus DMPS preschool, so I don't want people to misread the chart in that way. The real point here is that we know preschool makes a huge difference, and the closer our entering kindergartners are coming into our school with those foundational basic skills, the much more successful we are in supporting them to get to proficiency all the way through 3rd grade. Because of the efficacy of preschool and how important it is that we get all of our students into preschool, and we still have a significant gap there, as is evidenced by this data, and that was exacerbated by the interruptions created by COVID-19. We are implementing a campaign intended to harness our community partnerships to better reach out to all eligible preschool, potential preschool students, so that we can get that percentage of students successfully attending high quality preschool higher than we've had over the last period of years. The other thing that I wanted to just highlight here, I can well, I guess I can just speak to it. While we, as I mentioned, we are below the target cut point in each of these 4 grade levels. It is, I think, important to note that we did evidence some success with our summer programming because our summer loss was not as pronounced as it's been in past years, and we are showing movement in the right direction, especially when compared with last year. So while we're not up to where we need to be right now, which is why I have it marked as non-compliant, there are some signs that we are getting the momentum back, and as we get higher attendance by both staff and students, and a longer period of consistent instruction, longer period of consistent in-person instruction, I expect those that curve to tick up, but we're not there right now, so hence the non-compliant evaluation. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Bradley.
Thank you, Superintendent Ahart. We will now carry on with our conversation with our monitoring report. We will start with our questions in the who, what, and why area, and I will open it up to my board colleagues for questions.
Dr. Ahart, when you referenced page 9, you had mentioned, did I hear you correctly, 76% of all students? Can you just clarify? I'm not seeing that. Is it a combination of DMPS partner preschools and DMPS preschool?
Yeah.
So that would be the 57% is a combination of those two? Did I might have misheard.
Well, if you see, let me add these up again in my head.
Oh, I'm seeing the out-of-district preschool is included in that. It's everything except that 24%.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
If you can stay on that chart, I do have a question about that chart. So this is just the percentage of kids K through 3 meeting that benchmark. So we still have, what's the number of kids not meeting benchmark? And maybe that's having to do the math on.
Well, that's up in the first graphs.
Okay. Oh, okay. So having to go back and do the math then. Okay. So it's not easily laid out. We'd have to go configure. That's why I'm just curious of those kids who are not meeting benchmark, like how many, like just kind of looking at that overall. We can see for those who are meeting benchmark, it definitely has an impact for attending.
Oh, so you mean
preschool.
What are the percentages of preschool attendance for those not meeting benchmark?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Okay. No, I'm not going to hazard a guess on that, but we can pull that for sure.
Okay. Okay.
You had referenced the summer slide not being as significant based on your response to data. I'm sorry, there's a lot of pages. I don't remember what page it's on. But you had mentioned looking at fall of 2021 versus fall of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Did we look at, or how do we know that the students that attended summer school, and I just said a how question. I'm gonna wait. I'm sorry. Sorry, Madam Chair, I will wait.
I think to that point though, do we have on here where our students who attended summer school? I think it is kind of a what question. I could be wrong, but I think what we actually, you're making me think. What I want to know is how did those students who attended summer school do compared to last year on the benchmark? Like I think we want to know what's the impact of those hours of those teachers and those dollars that are being spent. And I'm sure you don't, I don't know if it's on this report, but I think that would be something.
That specific question's not on this report, but it's certainly something that we can generate if that's desired by the board.
Well, I think it would just be good for all of us to know, you know, you and your staff included, of if that's the right lever, how do we get more kids into that program next summer? If that really is what's moving the needle for us, maybe that's a thing we need to leverage further. And I think we don't know that unless we have the data.
We do. I don't have the data here, but we
okay.
we have looked at that data. It's not. It was not as promising as I was hoping it would be. It did certainly. The evidence in this benchmark does seem to indicate that it had a positive impact, but not as pronounced as we would have hoped. For a couple of reasons. One was consistency of attendance by the students, and then not all the students who we would have really hoped to have served being served in it. But that's something we can take a deeper look at with the board if the board would like.
So Tom, on page 4, and I'm going to reference in probably page 3 too, but on page 4, for the second grade students meeting fast, if you look at spring, 46%, and then you look at fall, 37%. So there was there was a pretty significant dip there, right? And then you go to, if you look at kindergarten, well, I know these are not the same cohorts, but if you look at kindergarten and you look at first grade, definitely we saw a slide, that summer slide, but it was not as steep as what we saw with that second grade class. Is there a reason that you could identify with that? And maybe I remember kind of having this conversation last time too with our black male report, but kind of understanding those students where they had not had that in-class experience, if that was the difference, but just kind of curious why that is so significant compared to the other two, kindergarten and first grade.
Would you mind just repeating the question? Because I lost the beginning of it in my ear here.
Okay, so when you look at page 4 and you look at the spring versus fall of the second grade students, it was about 9% decline in looking at meeting assessment. Do you see that from 46% in the spring to 37% in the fall? I'm on page 4.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you look at page 3 and you look at either, kindergarten, spring was 51%, in the fall was 48.2%. For first graders, it was 41.1%, fall was 38.2%. So 2 to 3% roughly, but there was definitely a significant dip for that second grade.
Yeah, the second grade, I think is I'm going to put my plug back in here. It gets a little echoey, so sometimes it's hard to follow the question. We would attribute the second grade slide having more to do with where they left off and those discrete skills that we're trying to work through at the second grade level. We know the second grades are really what we're measuring with each of these grade levels is different based on where they're supposed to be, where we hope that they would be in terms of their reading development. And the second grade just asks for a different level of a higher level of I guess I would say complexity in what we're asking of them. So second grade is traditionally a kind of one of those sort of jump years where the students take a big step forward in the depth of their literacy. And so I think we're seeing that because of what they've missed, or the compromised nature of instruction that's happened with them for those critical years of kindergarten and first grade, that there's still some catch up to do there. So they don't have that level of automaticity that we want them to have as they come into second grade.
Can I just follow up from that? It said the second grade is traditionally a jump year, where they take a big step forward. Is that correct?
No, what I meant was that what's expected of them is kind of like a big in terms of their of getting to comprehension. It's less discrete skills and more combining everything together. That's what I meant. So we're expecting. We don't see a big jump in terms of data, but what developmentally for the students, they have to take kind of a big jump in what we're asking of them on the FAST test. And maybe that's something Kelly could explain with a little more detail that would make better sense. I don't know if Kelly's on the line, if she wants to speak to that.
Yeah, I'm here. I think what Dr. Ahart's referring to is in second grade, when they come in the fall, they start sentence reading. So they start the CBM, which is a fluency measure. And then in first grade, there are a number of subtests they take. Fluency is one of them, but they take other ones as well. So it's weighted differently. So they do a nonsense word assessment and some blending, other decoding assessments that they do at the end of first grade. So the assessment's different. They have to put all those skills together to read a second grade passage fluently. And so we typically see a bit of a dip because of that. But these second grade students, just like, and I think Kelly, you were referring to, we talked about in our last report, these second grade students went out at the end of their kindergarten year. Right? And so they didn't get that base that they needed, and the back and forth during their first grade year was also difficult for them. So I think we saw a little bit larger discrepancy or a gap, slide back. We got them up a little bit in the spring, but they didn't have those skills to mastery. So we're still working towards mastering some of those skills that they needed pre-second grade. Now, does that answer your question, Kelly? Thank you.
Thank you for stating that much more eloquently.
In looking at page 2 of the data, it appears that our special education students have the lowest percentage of students meeting the third grade benchmark. What do you believe is currently happening with our special education population?
To explain why that's that low. At this level especially, this is so the data to which you refer on page 2 is the third grade students meeting FAST benchmark. So this is where we really start actually getting down to identifying specific learning disabilities with students. So that's largely based on discrepancies from their peers. And so this is largely cumulative, struggles and problem solving with students and trying to determine what the barrier is to reaching that goal. And so you would tend to see a pretty high level of discrepancy here because most of these students would have been identified for a very brief period of time, and so have not received a long period of special education related interventions, or haven't had very much time in an IEP.
Hey, can I hop in for just a quick second? Dr. Ahart, can you be a bit more specific with regard to special education? Because I think it's important for our listening audience to understand the breadth of the students that are considered special education and how they're identified, and individuals that may have an IEP, that may not have any developmental challenges, et cetera. So I think it's important to contextualize that. So would you mind doing that for us? No.
So students typically, and there are exceptions to this with child find, but for the vast majority of our students that enter school at kindergarten, they have no identification for any kind of IEP eligible services, and so there's this a process of instructing the students, and over time, and at the earlier grade levels, especially for those students for whom experiences like preschool have not been available, it's really difficult to tell why a student may be discrepant from their peers. There's a whole host of reasons that could be the case. A lot of it, especially for those students who have been unable to access preschool, has purely been an opportunity gap. And so the goal is for us to provide appropriate supports for all students, but not to label students unnecessarily. So our teachers work with their building leadership, with the parents, with all of the specialists that, especially in our special education department, to consult and try to identify, okay, we've noticed that this student is starting to have a gap between where their peers are and where we would typically expect to see this student. And then there becomes a problem-solving process over time. And as we talked about in the last discussion at our last meeting, the MTSS process, ensuring that when an issue is identified, that we're appropriately identifying it. So it may, to your point, there can be a learning disability, there can be a language deficit, there can be some sort of social emotional issue that's just preventing the student from fully accessing the instruction or the work that we ask for them to, the limited work we ask for them to do at home. And so it becomes this process of trying to do a comprehensive problem solving so that we can target exactly what the barriers are and then provide those direct supports. And so at the early grades, it's a challenge to do that accurately without pigeonholing a student prematurely because just the whole host of factors that the system is trying to interpret. So some of the students may be behaviorally discrepant, and so that's one of the concerns that we have, that we need to be really careful about over identifying, especially our Black males, because of what we see from our biased lens as discrepant behavior. Well, it may be discrepant from my perspective, but it may not be from someone else's perspective. Ensuring that we're providing support so they can access instruction, ensuring that one of the things that we know the research tells us real deeply and is a big key part to the preschool question is students who live in socially economic disadvantaged homes tend to have a much smaller vocabulary as they come into school, which is a huge component of their ability to master reading on time. And so just purely over time, being able to provide those opportunities for students can fill the gap in some cases. It's not a learning disability, it's an opportunity disability. So making those discrete decisions about each individual child takes some time, especially if we're making a real concerted effort to not over-identify students. So it sounds simple, but it's pretty complex. And even with older students, sometimes really defining what exactly is the challenge can be tough, and it's even more challenging typically for those younger students who don't have all of the tools that themselves personally to express exactly what it is that they're experiencing from the learner perspective. Excuse me, I'm going to plug my computer. I thought I had, but there we go.
So on a unrelated topic there, on page 7, the supplemental data, it says these are percent of male students with an IEP compared. So when it says, 8.6.2, is that an overall or is that above a certain amount? Above a certain benchmark, I mean?
No, that's just overall.
Okay.
And then then immediately below it's split by gender for that comprises that 8.62. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I explained it well.
Yeah, no, I was confused by the header on that and just making sure it was actually a percent of instead of the percent over or something like a comparison, Yeah,
no, I get what you mean.
Dr. Ahart, in your last response, you had mentioned students with a low socioeconomic status struggling. Will you point me to where that's at in the data? Because on page 2, our free and reduced price meal students are meeting benchmark at 42%. In comparison to that special education population, we're at 16%. So is it different from the third grade students that data shows that our free and reduced meals student population is in fact of a large concern?
Well, actually, I was using that as an example to help answer the question that Ms. Caldwell Johnson stated. So that's just one of the variables in trying to identify what's the particular cause for an individual student.
Thank you.
It's not referring to this specific data.
Dr. Ahart, is that what you're referring to? Is that I can't remember who the researcher is, but it talks just about the base number of words that kids hear before they come to kindergarten, just based on, like, I don't even know if you did that study or how old it is, but.
Well, it's been repeated many, many times, but there's a huge gap among the typical, socioeconomically disadvantaged student to someone who's not in that situation. And so but what we do know, regardless of cause, is that if a student comes in with a lot more exposure to language, vocabulary, compared to another student, they have a huge advantage in terms of especially early literacy.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I guess I had thought, I will need to go back and look at that because I've read through that study a few times, but I had thought that it was related more to education of parents than it was to socioeconomic status, because those two don't always go hand in hand necessarily.
Well, there are various studies, but the long and short of it is if you don't have the exposure, then you're at a disadvantage than if you do. And some of the research is also tied to books, number of books in the home and access to outside of school access to print, which we know typically our lower SES students are at a huge disadvantage in that regard. Typically, not always, but typically.
Well, and I was just wondering if that could potentially answer the question that Kim had asked about the 42%, mostly because I know myself, my mom was a teacher when I was in high school and we were still on reduced lunch, and, she was working towards a master's degree. So those don't always, family size, other things. So that's what I was pointing out, was that I think it has more to do with education level of parents probably than income, but it's fine.
Dr. Ahart, on page 1, where we do talk about the 19 out of 38 schools that are meeting their targets, what can you tell me about those schools? Why are they, what are they doing to be successful? And for those other 19 that are not meeting their goals, what could be done differently? Or maybe that's more of a how.
The biggest difference is really the I hate to put it this simply, but it really does come down to this: is the leadership at those schools, and ensuring that there really is commitment to dedicating the required time and following the core instruction as we know it needs to happen for students to progress. And so that has to happen with tremendous consistency and at a high level of quality. And that takes, persistence, it takes clarity, and it takes, everyone rowing in the same direction and making sure that nothing is allowed to pull away from that focus. And so the more consistent and the more they double down on what we know works and giving the appropriate amount of time and intervention that's not at the sacrifice of core instruction, the more successful they are. And we need to continue to support our building leadership and ensuring that that's happening across the board with all of our kids. That's the single biggest difference that we can point to.
What
Can I
types
ask
of, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask a quick follow-up question. So who would be responsible for determining resource allocation and other supports that would go to schools that may or may not be meeting the targets?
Well, there's a base allocation that all of our schools get, because we do have to maintain a level of equity because of equity, but also because of Title I rules, which is hamstrings us a bit. But ultimately, it's the principal supervisor working with those individual building leadership teams and ensuring that they're applying the resources that they do have available effectively, and strategically relative to the goals, and not for some other priority that's not aligned with that. There's as I've discussed before, and it's kind of counterintuitive, even the level at which we provide resources for non-title buildings that are struggling figures into how our Title I allocations need to be allocated. So we need to demonstrate that we're not providing additional assistance based on the actual number of dollars spent on a per pupil basis at one school versus another school. We have to demonstrate that local and state funding is the same per pupil, and that title dollars, we can demonstrate that that's above and beyond what they would otherwise have gotten. So it becomes a bit of it's a very big challenge to provide additional supports in response to school data and not be out of compliance with what we need to demonstrate to the state to be in compliance with federal title regulations, if that makes sense. So it's really more a discussion of, are we allocating the resources at the building level, how we need to best accelerate the work of the goals. And sometimes convenience or tradition gets in the way of making some of those needed changes. So we're actually directing those resources toward the board goals and not some other perceived priority that I'm sure is important but isn't job one.
Yeah, it almost makes you feel like you're fighting with one arm tied behind your back.
It does make you feel like you're, both in that regard, but also just in how even, the vast majority of our elementary schools are funded with title, but even then, because of how we have to calculate that, not averaged, like the biggest issue is we can no longer average the cost of staff and then assign FTEs to buildings. We actually have to go building by building and say the two Title I teachers at this building costed this much. And so, and over here, because one of the teachers is, more veteran or, takes family insurance, that one costs more, even though the work they're doing is exactly the same. The service they're providing is exactly the same. So some some schools, we just can't give them enough money to pay for 2 staff people. So they have 1 staff person, and then they have these other dollars that we have to spend there, but it's more difficult to make the best use of those because there's not enough to, provide the personnel support that would really help, provide the support that the students need. That's something that we continue to get creative with and still stay in compliance. But the current regulations are just, they're well intended, but as I said in my testimony in front of the Senate, virtually impossible to implement in a way that's actually equitable.
I have a piggyback question. I think it's still a what question. Is there something that prevents us from, do we pay some of those second reading interventionists at 60% title funds, 40%, general fund? Like, does that already happen, or is there something that prevents us from being able to do that?
Oh, no, you can do that.
Okay, so are we currently doing that?
Not very much, because it doesn't really help with that problem.
No, but it would help with the equitability of having 2 at one school, wouldn't it?
Well, it potentially could, but you can't. You have to be able to prove that if I'm paying Ms. Sawyer 60% Title I, that she doesn't have a roster of students for 40% of her time. So if she's a kindergarten teacher, she could be a kindergarten teacher for 40% of the time, and then she would have to be doing title work 60% of the time.
So we couldn't have a reading interventionist that was doing general education reading intervention for 40% of the time and Title I intervention for 60% of the time.
Well, yeah, you could, but then are you going to have greater class sizes and then have more interventionists, or are you going to have smaller class sizes and really have targeted intervention?
I don't know. I guess I was just asking you for a potential solution to.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried, and in some cases that works, depending on the size of the building. But in the final analysis, the non-federal funds that we spend, the local and state, as they say in the regulations, need to be on a per pupil basis equivalent, building to building to building. So there's ways to slice and dice it if it makes sense in the schedule, but you still only get this much title allocation per student based on your percentage.
Right, I understand that. I just know that, I've worked in buildings where, staff members will say they have a 50% DOP designation, 50%, or whatever it is.
We have a bunch of
like that there are, right. Yeah. I just want to make sure that, in a time where we have very few dollars, that we are being as flexible and creative with them, knowing that our students need as small class sizes as possible. They need interventionists. We need to get title funds to kids. They need to read. They need to do math, that we have to get them, an enriching arts education. There's all of these things. I just want to make sure that when we say we know where every single one of our dollars is going, that we actually know where every single one of our dollars is going, and that we're using them as creatively and as flexibly as we possibly can. That's what I'm encouraging, because we're not getting more money. There's not more money coming. There's not more help coming, probably, just looking at the political landscape of where we're at. So I guess and I feel like I've mentioned this before, I just hope that we're being as creative and flexible as we can with our dollars. So that was my question, is are we being as creative and flexible with our dollars as we can?
Yes, I believe we're being as creative and flexible with our dollars as we can. We have, if you look at our staff list, you'll see all sorts of different funding sources supporting same positions.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess I don't know if we've ever looked at that data at the board level or like specifically broken down. Like, I don't remember in the 4 years I've been on the board ever specifically looking at what percentage of our staff are paid for out of X fund and Y fund. I mean, we look at very big over the top budget, but yeah, I'm not familiar with the data you're talking about. So. I have a question about progress monitoring, and I know the data has not been updated, but I had a question about, and we've probably talked about this before, and I've probably asked this question before, but it currently on number 2 asks, or on A, B, and C, It's the percent of students who aren't meeting the benchmark who are progress monitored. And we want 100% of our kids to be progress monitored every week. And we know when am I understanding that measure correctly?
Of 100% of the students.
Of the students not meeting benchmark.
Yeah,
Yep.
right, yep.
So I guess my question is, when we're in an environment where we look at attendance data regularly and we know that all of our students and most of our students who struggle are not attending school 100% of the time, I'm wondering if this is the right, like, is this what we should be measuring? One of the things that I had thought of, just for example, this fall, some of the students that I progress monitor, one of them was gone for a family funeral for a week and a half. Another one was out because a brother was exposed to COVID. You know, there's all these things that are happening with our students that are kind of beyond everyone's control. So how do we know that this is the progress monitor that's important for us to spend time tracking, I guess? How do we know this is the most important one? Because, you know, when staff are running progress monitoring, they're parring students who are, you know, have been at risk for more than 2 benchmarks. How do we know that this is the progress monitor that we should really be spending our time monitoring?
Dr. Ahart, before you answer that question, if I can jump in board and just say something. I know I normally stay quiet during this time, but actually, Kirsten, you brought up something that we actually would be looking at after monitoring. So a part of the progress monitoring flow is what we would do is we're now in the stage of talking about things during monitoring, but what we would do after monitoring, that was the question I was going to pose tonight that I wanted the board to be thinking about is, are we monitoring the right thing? And so you just jumped into my notes and that's all good. But that is something that I would ask once we had this conversation finished. So if you wouldn't mind me holding on to that.
Oh, I've got it written down.
Okay, and we'll do that at the end.
Okay.
I want to ask a question about the the data from. So people have asked about the kind of the missing the benchmark for different years of students, but if you look at it as cohort data, so last year's kindergartners or this year's first graders, on page 7 in the response to data, you noted that there was a 12% drop between the kindergarten spring data and the first grade fall data, which you indicated is probably speaks to a lack of skills weren't mastered at that time. Just kind of 2 questions off of that interest me is we kind of understand what that means, and then does that give us reason to be worried about data that we get? So if we're I think, and I'm not looking at the report right now, but I believe we were or close to 50% at the kindergarten spring data a year ago or at the end of last year. Is it a kind of is there such a thing as like a soft 50%, or is this is it a real 50%? How should the board interpret that, acknowledging that certain cohorts can slide quickly?
I think it's as hard a 50% as we can say. There's variance in the cohorts because of the actual students who are in, who are kindergartners this year. There may be many, changes. So it's not the exact, it's not a particularly clean cohort, but it's, generally speaking, it informs how the system is performing. So yeah, I would say it's a pretty hard 50%. I think one of the things though that impacts that I think impacted learning loss though over summer that makes the last 2 summers maybe more challenging than a typical year. If we'll have those again, is you can hit if you're just hitting that 50 at the end of the year, you just reached that, and it was a real push to get there, and that was because of, you know, compared to a regular year, inconsistent instruction, either in modality or frequency, you know, or quality in some ways. That slip can happen faster, if that makes sense. So I think my best answer is, yeah, it's as hard a, you know, a number as we can have. And at the different grade levels, like Kelly had helped me illustrate with, especially with second grade, where that level of complexity, you know, they take a big step in the level of complexity. There's real value in that consistent, you know, iteration until it's really, they really have automaticity. And if you're not quite there, that slip can happen really, you know, really rapidly. And so I think we were compromised to a degree at all those grade levels because of the challenges in modality and the other distractions relative to COVID.
I have another just really quick question. I'm going to go back to something you referenced in your opening comments, Dr. Ahart, regarding ways that we accelerate preschool opportunities and try to be a bit more targeted for those either pockets of the community or those pockets of students who don't traditionally access it. And I think that it's sort of like the chicken or the egg. So for those students that are able, because of a new focus on really pushing preschool experiences, have the ability to have those experiences, I think we'll see some shift in the data for those students. But that's a whole different crop of students than the ones we're dealing with now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of catch up that we're going to have to make with those students that either did or didn't have a preschool experience, but are still also lagging. So can you be more specific about sort of what the diagnosis is for those students? And as we think about what the future looks like for them as they complete at least their elementary years,
Mm-hmm.
where do you see us needing to push, needing to go? What are those interventions that you think are really going to help them get their stride?
Yeah. So as it relates to you know, the percentage of the overall incoming class that has preschool, if you imagine you have so many resources as a building principal, and you don't need to expend as many of those at kindergarten this year, because we have a much higher percentage of our students who are coming in, you know, ready for kindergarten, then that provides the avenue for, with the same amount of resources, to put more of those resources in those upper grades, you know, the first, second, and third grade that are still discrepant. So it allows us to redistribute already existing resources more strategically. The other thing that we are, and I'm not ready to talk about this yet, but we're just about ready to unveil a new, it'll start out as after school, it could potentially be before and after school program that we're going to pilot second semester at probably 3 schools. And if it shows, you know, promise, as we're pretty confident it will, that we would be expanding that more broadly. That's a program that will specifically target, it'll be available to all students, but specifically target students of color. And while it's not specific to, you know, it won't be a didactic instructional, you know, reading instruction, the goal will be to really immerse those students in highly culturally relevant reading materials, literature, art, and while they'll be exposed to more language and more relevant learning experiences, The other goal will be to help them have a more positive association with their school, because it'll be happening at their school. And if we're recruiting successfully, which is one of the reasons that we're not launching it sooner, hopefully working with adults, and a lot of them hopefully will be high school students that will be paid, that look like them, and that can, and that can connect with them more immediately. And if we see promise with that, we'll expand both the number of students that we're serving at those initial pilot schools, but also expand it to additional schools. And we hope to have data, and we're confident we'll have data that shows that the students, then we'll be recruiting, by the way, students, we'll be doing targeted recruiting for that after school program, students who we specifically identified as having a deficit in reading. We hope to be able to demonstrate that we can accelerate progress that way. One of the other issues in the regular school day is there's just only so many hours, and we don't want to cheat students out of the full experience of physical education and art and music and health, and we want them to have an enjoyable experience and not feel like it's a drill and kill based on a reading score. So having a way to provide an experience that is more personally fulfilling for the student, if you will, that's a rounder experience, but kind of gets to building reading capacity sort of through the back door, is something that we think shows promise. And so that's the other avenue, because I think Ms. Delagardelle is correct that in our current political environment, I don't see an influx of funds coming from anywhere, with the possible exception of federal money to support pre-K, which I dearly hope happens. But shy of that, in our own preschool recruiting efforts, we have to find some other ways to engage students and help them be more internally motivated to excel academically. And so the onus is on us to make that experience more relevant and more enjoyable. We'll continue to look for solutions like that actually show that's something different than what we're doing now, but can demonstrate real results, because that will take an investment. But if it's paying off, we'll figure out a way to continue to grow that investment.
Just really quickly, what's the source of the revenue used to fund that in the pilot phase?
In the pilot, it'll be, we don't have that completely figured out. It'll be a combination of 21st century and possibly some of the ESSER funds.
I'm not hearing any other questions from the board. I'd like to ask, going to the how questions. Are there any future questions that you have? We'll always end it with how the board can help support the work of the superintendent, but is there anyone that has any how questions?
I do have one how question. Superintendent Ahart, on page 2, all the data is there for the 3rd grade students that are either meeting or not meeting the FAST assessment. And for those that are meeting, the only students would be our Asian students and our white students, as well as we look at gender, our female, although I would question Black females. I did some numbers, and those numbers are not well. So for all those other students, how are we going to support them, lift them to be successful in 3rd grade and to achieve these benchmarks?
Well, it's a combination of the levers that we referenced later on in the report, but this is a particularly challenging group because of where they were developmentally or chronologically in school when we were so compromised with COVID. So we'll be, having to take a look at how we're allocating resources differently, because we have a group coming through that had a, historically different experience. And so we're going to have to do some different approaches to what support looks like beyond third grade, because while I think the board was absolutely on target in setting the goal for third grade, we can't, stop at third grade and say, well, I guess we missed it, because we're still going to have a lot more success accelerating at fourth grade and fifth grade than we are at sixth grade. And we're going to have a lot more success at fifth grade and sixth grade than at seventh grade, and so on and so forth. So we're going to have to relook at, I think, the staffing for next year as we put the budget together is going to have to be very strategic in terms of recognizing that, just like you adjust for, we don't talk this way in a district this size very much, but in a smaller district, you talk about a bubble class, where you have, for whatever reason, an unusually high number of students at a particular grade. And that as that bubble works its way through the system, there's all sorts of, budgetary implications, to react to that. This is really the same concept. We're going to have to target this group of students and monitor how we're doing with them and make sure that we're putting in additional supports moving forward, based on where they are at the end of third grade, to say, look, we're still not where we need to be. And so what does fourth grade support need to look like different from how we typically staff? So I can't tell you exactly what that will look like, but that's how we're thinking about it.
So kind of 2 points from that. One, I absolutely agree. And I'm glad to hear you say it doesn't stop at third grade, because especially everything I've been learning around like our IM math curriculum, that is very reading heavy focused. And so we're not going to see success in math with our kids if literacy is not where it will be supportive for them in that curriculum. But I just would also, if you could, as we come into budget time, because I want to draw upon what my colleague, Ms. Della had referenced to, usually we get the overarching budget. So it's really helpful for us as you put that budget together, that we understand how these allocation of funds are being directed to support our board goals.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious if that particular response to data is here in the report, the budgetary allocation response. So I am seeing that support of additional learning for our leadership, our coaches, is definitely a response, but what you're referencing with regards to additional supports or allocation staffing is not reflected here as I can see. Is that correct?
That's correct. I didn't try to include anything that went beyond, that spoke beyond this year in the report, but I certainly can add that information if that's something that would be.
No, that's okay. If it's beyond this year, that staffing and budget allocation, that helps me understand. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I was having a conversation with a friend whose daughter attends the downtown school, and she is a virtual student this year for kindergarten. And one of the things that was offered was a training, for whoever was going to be the learning facilitator at home with that student. And so I guess I'm wondering, are we doing similar types of trainings or outreaches to the family, to all of our families, to help support, what we're doing at school, so they can support that at home? Have we been, partnering with our parents who are often more than willing to help their kids at home, but don't always know? So how are we reaching out to families?
Well, we could do a better job on that, frankly, as a system. Individual schools have different approaches to that. That's not something that we've driven as a core strategy, but certainly one that bears some more attention. That's a good point.
I guess that would just be a tiny kudos too for whoever, if it's happening all over, but I thought that that was really interesting to spend some time with whoever the adult facilitator of learning at home was for this year, because we had a little bit of time to foreplan so that that adult was prepared and had all the tools they needed to help the students at home. So.
Right.
I just had a quick comment, and maybe Dr. Ahart, you can speak to this, but there's a initiative that the Annie E. Casey Foundation and Ralph Smith have been advancing for years, the campaign for grade level reading. And I know that over time, Des Moines has been a pace setter city through our United Way. But I really think that we are to a point, not only with this data, but also with what I anticipate we'll be seeing with our students as our ELL population potentially grows over the course of the next several years, and we see other demographic shifts and changes in our population. But I feel like it's time for us as a district to really engage with our community to make literacy a priority. I don't think that we can wait for the trends and all of the initiatives that we've advanced here in this district to catch up. I think we really have to elevate literacy, not only as a priority in our community, but to figure out how everybody can galvanize their organizational muscle and leverage their organizational resources and our community resources to the benefit of our students. We're at a real inflection point right now, and I feel like we have got to really think about things differently. And I feel that Des Moines Public Schools can do a lot, but we can do a lot more when we have community partners who are willing to come alongside of us and really elevate our issues in ways that will not only yield benefits to our students, but really ultimately will yield huge benefits to our economy. So I'm going to challenge this board to really think about ways that we become much more engaged in allowing our issues to become our community's issues, and for our challenges to be our community's challenges, so that together we can make the kinds of differences we need to make for our students. So I'm going to put that before this board as something that we really need to be thinking about, and I'm going to ask us to challenge ourselves in ways that maybe we've not challenged ourselves before. But I think it's time for us to step up and lead, but we can't lead by ourselves. We have to have everyone else in the community helping us to lead together.
And I want to kind of piggyback off of what Terry just said. I actually got onto the Des Moines Public Library's website because I know that they offer a lot of services for getting kids ready to read. And we've talked about the gaps of preschool and how we just don't have the resources yet. And I guess I don't know what kind of partnering we're doing with our public library, but they have right on here, parents are the best teachers to get their children ready to read. You are your child's first and most important teacher. You know your child best. Children are most ready to read when they're in a good mood. You know your child's mood's best. Children learn best by doing things. So take every chance you can to read with your children, tell stories, talk about them, say nursery rhymes, and sing songs. And so I just wonder, how many families do we have who already have school-age children who might have a preschool or younger child at home, that if we were starting to build, and really dug in on our community schools approach that I hear us mention occasionally, and really dug in, how and what outcomes could we get by bringing our community into the school and, partnering with our families and parents. And, we know, especially now, our kids in some ways have been home for a long time. Their parents, have seen them way more as the way their learning is over the last few years, or, over the last year and a half. I think now is the time to leverage, what the parents have seen and, give them some tools to really help us. I really do think there are parents out there who, they want what's best for the kids, but they don't necessarily know what to do. And I think we're in a unique position to help make that connection with other community partners, United Way, the public library. I mean, there are other things out there because we don't have librarians in our schools to help us, with some of that literacy things that just fall beyond just, the reading instruction. And so, how can we leverage that?
Superintendent Ahart, how can the board continue to help and support you at this time in the district?
Thank you for that question. I think that Ms. Caldwell-Johnson and Ms. Delagardelle really, I think, pointed to that. You know, we, public education writ large, but especially urban environments are starved for resources, and we do have a very fine staff, but we don't have as much help as we would like, and we've gone through a historic period where through everyone's best effort, despite everyone's best efforts, the educational process was, the traditional education process was severely interrupted, and that impacted our students of color and our economically disadvantaged students at a greater level, and so we actually have a gap right now that we're trying to bridge, that we need to accelerate our progress, and there just isn't enough time and staff and energy within the bounds of DMPS to do everything that needs to be done to ensure that these students are genuinely ready before they exit elementary school. Something that I do talk about quite often, and Ms. Caldwell-Johnson brought up, this is if it doesn't speak to the community in any other way, is a huge economic lever. We want a diversified workforce, not just in education, although we desperately need that, but we have our diverse workforce being served by 5,000 staff within Des Moines Public Schools. We have 32,000 students, and over 60% of them are students of color, and they bring with them a wealth of cultural knowledge and language abilities that a lot of us just dream of having. And so if we can make that investment, and it does take an investment beyond what DMPS itself can do, we can certainly lead the effort, but anything that the board can do in a coordinated effort to elevate the challenges that we're trying to face as a broader community challenge, and not just falling solely on the shoulders of the teachers of DMPS and the leaders of DMPS, but that all of us share in the responsibility, and we all share in the benefits as well. But we know the way Iowa funds schools, there is no meaningful correction for accelerating progress for students that come in behind, who come in disadvantaged for whatever reason, whether it's a language deficit, whether it's an experience deficit, whatever the challenge, our system does not recognize that in any meaningful way. And so to accelerate, and people, when you have the opportunity to actually explain that to people, they get it. So in some way, we need to bridge that gap. And we talk about our legislative priorities and how we want that to be recognized in the basic foundation formula. But to Ms. Delagardelle's earlier point, even if that does happen, certainly we're not expecting a windfall of greater investment versus GDP in our state in any time in the near future. So the more we can motivate families to really take seriously getting their students into preschool, if at all possible, to make that opportunity more accessible to more of our families, and for everyone to help share that message in a real potent way, that literacy is not optional. You can be a full participant in this economy as an adult if you're fully literate. And to Ms. Sawyer's point earlier too, it's not just about reading and literacy. If you don't have those skills, you're going to be at a huge deficit in every other area of study. Regardless of what your career goals are or what your educational goals are, literacy is necessarily a part of that. And so it's just absolutely crucial that we lift up all of these young people to a place where they can be self-directed learners, and they can't do that unless they're literate. And so it's a very long way of saying, the more coordinated the board can be in its messaging to the community, and to help me and my team look for levers in the community that we can utilize to help get more support around these students who really need it, the better off the whole system will be.
Thank you, Superintendent Ahart. I'm asking for a motion and a second to accept the third grade monitoring report, part 1, as providing evidence for compliance with the reasonable interpretation of policy 4.1. Can I have a second and a motion and a second?
Sawyer, so moved.
I have a quick clarifying question. You had said we were going to hold some of the, what next? Does that happen after we vote?
Okay.
Thank you. I second Ms. Sawyer's motion.
We have a motion by Ms. Sawyer and a second by Ms. Della Gardell. Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Cody?
Yes.
Ms. Della Gardell?
Yes.
Ms. Martirano?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. Now that we've completed that part of our monitoring, now we're looking at our after monitoring. And normally what we haven't done this before, but this is just a part of what we will get used to doing as well as a board, is we start looking at the question, Ms. Della Gardell, that you brought up about the policy. And so if you would like to go ahead and raise your points to that question we have, Ms. Della Gardell.
Yeah, so just as a quick reminder, I'm looking at progress measure 2, A through C. It looks like, and I think Dr. Ahart had confirmed this earlier, that what we're trying to do is get 100% of students who are not meeting benchmark progress monitored. And so we're coming really close to that in, third grade and second grade. So I guess it would beg the question, like, what's going on in first grade this fall or last fall where we, weren't seeing that. But I think what I'm wondering is this the right thing for us to be looking at? Because to me, it seems like if we have all of our supports in place and we feel pretty confident, with a 95% implementation that, we're following our processes to fidelity, is what we're really tracking as student attendance. And is that maybe what we want to look at instead? I don't know. I'm not sure if this is giving us the data that we want, or if we want 95% of our students to be progress monitored, 100% of the time. It's just, I know from doing these that there are lots of reasons why you miss kids that are often out of the control of the classroom teacher, the students. There are other things that happen that can impact these numbers. So.
Superintendent Ahart, just so you know, it's not that you have to give an answer for this right now, but I think it's something that if, after this point, if we're looking at that, it's just something for you to think about. And, if that's a conversation as a board that we need to have further to dig deeper into that, that's what I would suggest that we do. But I think it's just a good thing to think about, and just for you to be mindful of that. Is there anyone else that wants to chime in off of what Ms. Della Gardell has brought up? Again, this will just be giving this information to the superintendent for him to be thinking about. And then I think as a board, it might be another conversation that we need to have, but just want to open it up to anyone else.
I very much appreciate you bringing that up. I think that in order to, continuously improve and be in a loop of monitoring our own work, that we need to be asking these questions of how effective are we being in our process to monitor our progress towards this goal. I would just like to lift up that, when we started our monitoring process in this way, we were very intentional about the amount of data we were consuming in each report. So to just be cognizant of, I felt that this particular report was
very detailed and had a great deal of information, but I think it got to the point of being too much and felt a little bit like it was hard to consume from the standpoint of really diving in deep and understanding where we were at with each of these. So if we do look at adjusting these data, then perhaps also looking at breaking it up into separate monitoring sessions so that we can do a deeper dive in and be very specific and intentional. We can have some of those more 3D conversations around the data that Ms. Delgardelle is referencing to ensure that we're getting a full look and a full understanding of the reality of where we're at.
I would also just, and thank you, Ms. Delgardelle, for bringing up that question, because I have been questioning this myself. And for me, I would say Superintendent Ahart, because I wasn't here when these goals and progress measures were developed. I would like a greater understanding of how do we know that measuring, and we did not do that tonight. I know we didn't measure the progress, the number of kids being progress monitored, but how do we know that that will get us to achieve our goal? And so that's just a question I have that, again, don't need an answer tonight, but just maybe if there is a conversation, that's really, for me, I've thought, how do we know that that's going to get us to what we hope to achieve? And maybe you have that, predictive analytics that you've done to know that this is what will get us there, but I would like greater understanding of that at some point.
I had just a real quick comment. After our last meeting, I spent a little bit of time with Tim and Kelly, just sort of walking through our last monitoring report and then also today's report. And I think I sent a memo out to the board just sort of updating you on the things that we discussed, or maybe I just sent it to board leadership. I can't remember. At any rate, one of the things that was raised was how we calibrate our calendar and how we sequence the reports that we're getting so that, number one, there's more time to review and analyze the data so the response to the data can be much more rich and content heavy. But then also making sure that we don't get the chicken before the egg relative to the all students monitoring report versus the black males monitoring report. So I know that the superintendent has recently provided us with a monitoring schedule for our review and consideration. And I have to assume that that takes into consideration the feedback that Tim and Kelly provided. But I wanted to just lift that up because that was really helpful information to me as I sort of sifted through ways that I could better utilize not only my voice relative to this particular exercise and the work that we're doing around monitoring, but ways that we might allow ourselves to be critical about those things that are important, especially the schedule and the time required to review the data as part of our process. So I think it would be really important for us to consider not only the pace and rigor with which we're doing our monitoring, but also the schedule and sequencing of it so that the information we're getting allows us all to have fidelity back to our own process.
Thank you all for your feedback. And one last thing that I'd just like to mention before we wrap up the whole monitoring thing is there's a rubric that I'm going to be sending you all that it's something, this is new, but it's also going to be helping us as we're thinking about how effective we are being with our monitoring. And so I'm going to send that rubric just for you to just look at to help us prepare for future monitoring conversations and just some things that we want to be looking at as far as preparation, data and opinions, questions and statements, past and future, and progress monitoring and project management. And so you'll see this rubric. I'll share it with you all tomorrow, but I want us to just kind of start thinking about this rubric and how we want to get into the column where we are highly effective monitoring. And I think that will be very important. And we still have practice to do this with this. So I don't expect that we're going to fall in that column right now at this point, but it's something that we want to, that will be a goal for this board for us to get to as we continue to have our coach and training and some PDs around monitoring and our questioning in the near future. The next item on the agenda is consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please email anna.jenkins@dmschools.org. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to the agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
Brendan Oliver.
Hi, Brandon Oliver. I live at 3021 Southwest 29th Street, Des Moines, Iowa, 50321. I'm going to speak on the Fine and Performing Arts Monitoring Report. As a music education student at Drake, I was told in one of my classes that my job would be cut at least once in my career, because the reality is that arts classes are not generally valued by schools. My job was accessed after my second year of teaching in DMPS in 2010. My job was again accessed in 2015. I looked through this monitoring report. For me, as a music educator, it is heartbreaking. I hope you'll look through it with me. The policy at the top mentions fine and performing arts classes as if we're core content, but the district defines us as extended core. This is why we get half the instructional time, as we meet every other day. On weeks like this week, half of my students will only meet one time for the whole week. Being labeled as extended core is why we're not offered intervention times with our students, such as private or group lessons. In DMPS, the arts are not dignified as a core part of who our students are, which means our students are not fully dignified. Math, reading, and science are who our district thinks students are at their core. Please look at the monitoring report section on interpretation, where the arts aren't even considered when it comes to college readiness. Yet, and I say this literally, the arts were my main focus in college. It's what I teach every day. It's why many more of our students will go to college. According to this report and how our system functions, some students' college aspirations don't matter. The context section states that over the last 5 years, there's been a concerted effort to increase the enrollment of students into the music programs, and it talks about guaranteeing access to instruments for students at an early age. What it doesn't mention is that fourth grade orchestra was cut from our district around 5 years ago, or that piano lessons were cut around the same time. It doesn't mention that some of my instrumental music colleagues teach at 9 elementary schools, or that several of us teach 3 content areas over multiple grade levels, such as band, orchestra, and applications of music for 6th through 8th grade. Those are 3 completely different classes. The report doesn't mention that students in music programs don't consistently have equal access to instrumental music interventions or lessons, like I did when I attended Brody Middle School as a beginning 8th grade percussion student. The report doesn't mention theater at all, outside of the section about GT, which implies that proficiency in theater is more of a gift or a talent than a learned skill. I've witnessed the frustration from our theater colleagues during professional development meetings when they aren't dignified at all, not even mentioned or acknowledged. In my experience, theater helps us practice social interaction and connectedness. Music classes teach us to listen to each other. Visual arts classes teach us to see our own humanity. It's these receptive skills that are so very necessary to have, but unfortunately our district does not value them as much as math, reading, and science. I do think those are necessary content areas. However, we need the arts to not only make them beautiful, but to truly understand each other as human beings. We need the arts to experience and bask in culture. We need the arts for the sake of art. Arts classes shouldn't fundamentally function as core content planning time, or what I always hate to hear, a break during the day. We need the arts for societal growth. Arts education is necessary on its own merit. Please have us be the main focus of a discussion at a board meeting, and be sure to invite active arts students, teachers, and community members to participate. Please reflect deeply on this heartbreaking monitoring report. It demeans the passion and purpose of so many of our students. Our students' lives are a part of our society, and we cannot understand society if we don't understand our students. When it comes to Board Policy 4.1.1D, demonstrating an understanding of the value of fine and performing arts in our society, or in society, our paid district leaders need to first demonstrate their understanding of fine and performing arts in our students' lives.
30 seconds.
Then, and only then, we might be able to become compliant. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no further speakers.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins, and thank you, Mr. Oliver, for your comments addressing the board this evening. Ms. Sawyer, I believe you have the consent motion.
Yes, I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $4,054,380.50.
Is there a second?
Cody,
Martorano,
second.
second.
We have a motion by Ms. Sawyer and a second by Ms. Martorano. Is there any discussion or questions? Ms. Jenkins, please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Sorry, mute button, yes.
Ms. Martorano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The consent items are approved 7-0. The next item on our agenda is E1, public hearing for restroom upgrades at Hannah Walk, Hoover, Hubble, Lovejoy, North High, Oak Park, Pleasant Hill, and Woodlawn. The public hearing has come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E1?
We do not.
Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Farnsworth Group for restroom upgrades at various locations, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I have a motion and a second to approve item E1?
Martorano, so moved.
Caldwell Johnson, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Martorano and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Is there any discussion or questions? Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martorano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. Next on the agenda is other items. First up, a request for a hearing with the School Budget Review Committee for modified supplemental amount for asbestos abatement projects. Superintendent Ahart, would you introduce the matter?
Yes, there's an allowance in, it's a little known allowance that we learned of lately that for certain asbestos abatement projects, if we use general fund dollars, we can get that spending authority refunded to us. And so we would like to take that action to the tune of almost $200,000. I don't believe the district has done this in prior years. But this is a tool at our disposal that we think will be advantageous financially to the district.
May I have a motion and a second to approve the request and exhibits as presented for a hearing with the SBRC for modified supplemental amount of $191,928.42 for asbestos abatement projects during the period of July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021 that were paid for using general fund dollars.
Caldwell Johnson, move approval.
Delagardelle, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Delagardelle. Is there any discussion or questions? Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes?
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. The next item under other is resolutions and approvals on the school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue refunding bonds, Series 2021. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board give approval and consent on appointing of the paying agent tax exemption certificate, continuing disclosure certificate, and authorizing the terms of issuance and providing for and the securing and payment of school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue refunding bonds.
May I have a motion and a second for approval and consent for appointing of the paying agent tax exemption certificate, continuing disclosure certificate, and authorizing the terms of issuance and providing for and securing the payment of school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue refunding bonds?
Caldwell Johnson, move approval.
Cody, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Mr. Cody. Are there any discussion or questions?
To clarify, these were the bonds that we had the special meeting for on Wednesday a few weeks ago? Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure I'm following that.
Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes?
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. Next on our agenda is items of privilege. Do I have any board members who have any comments to share?
I suppose if people are interested, you have 35 more minutes to get to the polls to vote.
Yes, you do.
I hope if they made it with us this far into the meeting, they already voted. But if you didn't, stop listening now and go vote.
I just have a comment. If you all would allow me to just take a moment to share some of my thoughts of things that have happened in this past week. The events of this past week have been very troubling, to say the least. It was this very district that stated it wanted to be an anti-racist system, and it's something this board supports. But as I've said before, and I'll say it again, do we know what we're saying? There is so much work that is involved with truly being anti-racist, and the biggest hurdle is changing the hearts and minds of others. We can do all the PDs, trainings, and reading all the books that we like, but if we don't make the choice to change the thinking in our minds and our hearts, then being anti-racist becomes a problem. It is my hope that the people who work in our district, from the superintendent to the volunteer and everyone in between, will choose to change the way they think and what's in their heart. It will be the only way that true change will take place in this district. I contemplated resigning my position after the recent events took place this week because I stated that I didn't want to be connected to a place that is speaking words but showing no action. I've since decided that I'm needed in this place, and while not many will admit that, I know that's what truly matters. So I will spend the next 2 years on this board making sure that the district holds true to its words to be an anti-racist system for those students who look like me and those who don't, because I'm depending on you all to do better. Superintendent Ahart, I will turn it over to you for your report.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. Traffic at our 2 COVID testing sites continues to be steady. While we hit a peak of around 150 to 160 every day at each site, we are still testing more than 60, closer to 70 each day. So we think that that's a service that we need to continue to provide because it's providing ready access and quick turnaround time. And is a really good resource for our nurses who often encounter either staff or students who appear to be symptomizing, and we can get them directly into a quick turnaround test and hopefully limit the time that they have to be away from school and from work. We had a discussion this afternoon actually with our partners at NOMI in an effort to strategize how we can best accelerate vaccinations for our 5 to 11-year-olds when that vaccine is finally approved. And I just received word literally about 3 minutes ago that the director of the FDA has given her approval, so the long wait is over, and so now it's a matter of distribution and ensuring that we actually get not just the vaccine, which we already have, but actually get vaccinations. So you'll be hearing more in the very near future from DMPS about how you can help your child access the vaccine for those 5 to 11-year-olds who heretofore have not had access. Another point I'd like to just point up for our community, the board held a brief special meeting the day after our last regular meeting where they approved the sale of 3 different revenue bond series. This is much like refinancing a home, and while it receives little attention, and they took final action tonight to issue a new series in replacement of those 3, it's really important for our community to know that over the next 10 years, the district will have nearly $7 million additional dollars to invest in our schools, extending an extraordinary track record of administering our saved funds to the benefit of our students. It's not a real flashy thing to do, but we take a special pride in ensuring that we're good stewards of the public dollars, and the action that the board took tonight, as well as last Wednesday, or 2 Wednesdays ago rather, is a real testament to that. It'll be a huge difference maker for our kids. And then finally, I'd just like to offer congratulations to our own Deborah Carr, who has been awarded the 2021 Catherine G. Williams Diversity Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Association of Social Workers, Iowa chapter. Congratulations, Ms. Carr. That's all I have for tonight.
Thank you, Superintendent Ahart. Thank you all for tuning in this evening on this election night. We appreciate it. This meeting is adjourned at 7:30 p.m.